started writing less, fewer hours. And I told myself, instead of trying to go, how many chapters can I do today? I'm not a machine, but I'm kind of a machine.
Yeah.
In that I show up and I do my 3 to 5 pages a day, and I don't wait for the muse, because there isn't any muse to wait for. I'm it. And when I show up, the muse has shown up. Now it's time to kick the muse in the ass and make them get to work. I don't believe in that waiting for inspiration shit. You know, you're your own inspiration. And what you'll find on those days you feel really inspired and you put it down, and on those days you don't feel inspired and you force yourself to work, it reads the same. You either get better or you don't. And you get better when you first start, you get better in like 4 to 6 months increments. Later on, it's a little slower. But my deal is I get up 7 days a week. Once in a while, I'll take a day off or decide I'll take a week off between a project. But even most time when I finish the project, I get up the next morning and go right to work, even if it's on a short story or a poem or whatever, because I like doing it. I'm not someone who likes having written, although I like that as well, but I like writing.
Folks, before we start this episode, if you could do one thing, would you please hit that subscribe button? It really helps us out. We'll kick those tires and start that perpetually fake fire. It's time to camp. Gas prices, once again, are cost prohibitive, forcing us to camp virtually. Today, we welcome the deadliest author we've ever had. Joe Lansdale is a best-selling author, and we don't know what's greater, the number of punches and kicks he's doled out or the number of awards he's received for writing. He is a master of the black belt and the black ink, a member of the Literary Hall of Fame of the great state of Texas. Please welcome the one and hopefully the only Joe Lansdale to the campfire.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you, man. So I have to say, I mean, is there a subgroup of authors who are martial arts masters that you get together with, or is that sort of a lonely activity in the writing community?
Well, there are a lot of authors who practice martial arts. I may be one of the only ones that's been doing it 59 years. I'm sure there's probably others out there, but I've been doing it since I was 11.
Oh, wow. What got you into martial arts?
I started to say my father, and that's true, but also Batman comics. You know, Batman studied all kinds of things, and one of those things that he studied was martial arts, jujitsu and boxing and judo and karate, and those were listed in some of the comics, and I wanted to be like Batman. And I always felt like that I owe my career to some extent to Batman, because it gave me a lot of curiosity. And I started reading a lot of different things, practicing a lot of different martial arts. My father was a boxer and wrestler, and he had done some of that in the 1930s in the Great Depression. He would go to fairs, catch trains and ride to fairs and box and wrestle. And he was like 42 when I was born. My mother was maybe 38. So they were already, older folks. My brother and I are 17 years apart, but he taught me the basics of self-defense and some boxing and stuff. And that led me to studying judo at the YMCA. And then that led to others. And so I guess Batman and my father.
There you go. And the type you practice is called, you just told me before and I already forgot the pronunciation of it. So,
Chaun.
And where does that originate from? Is there a philosophy? I did Taekwondo for years growing up, and that was, at least the expression I was taught was it was self-defense. It was always used to deter and not. And then I did Krav for a couple years, which was entirely different and much more violent.
I've done that too.
Oh yeah, it's fun. What is the sort of MO and the philosophy of your particular martial art?
Well, it's hard to put that kind of thing in a nutshell, but what I will say is I studied a lot of different martial arts for many, many years. And the martial arts art I created, Shen Martial Science and Family System, was inducted into the United States Martial Arts Hall of Fame and got a lot of recognition from the International Martial Arts Hall of Fame. So I felt brave enough to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do my own thing. And I did. And about 1996 was when it was founded. And it's a mixture of a number of martial arts. We use a Chinese name for the simple reason that I think they were the greatest martial arts laboratory. They were not the only one, but I think the greatest one. but I studied everything from judo to kempo to Thai boxing to taekwondo. I have ranks in several things: aikido, daitaru. Uh, Man, it goes on and on. And then I've had a bit of training and a lot of other stuff. And then I've had a school since 94 or 90, 92 or 94. I'd have to stop and look. And so I've been teaching a long time, been studying a long time, because you never quit studying. And I have the title grandmaster, but I never think of that as any more than just a designation that I've been doing it a while and that I'm still practicing. And I'm 70 and I still teach private lessons, and I still surprise young people that come in. And yeah, but my take is that it is, you start out wanting it for self-defense, which is, not a bad reason, especially growing up in Gladewater, Texas, when I did in the 1950s, 60s, early 70s. And then you start finding that there's other things to it, because if you're really studying it, and I don't mean strip mall twice a week on, Tuesday and Thursday, I mean serious dedication to martial arts, which, my body will tell you how serious it's been. But I have really found that there's a lot more to it than just self-defense, and just, sometimes an offense is a defense, and sometimes you try to avoid anything that's unnecessary. But it's not a mixed martial art, it's a blended martial art. And there's a difference. Mixed is like a fruit salad. Blended is more like you put everything in the blender and it's actually blended, so that you're not doing a judo technique and a karate technique. You're doing the techniques that blend one into the other in such a way that it's not as distinguishable as one art. It becomes one art, but it becomes Shen Chuan, because I borrowed from others and found things that work. And we work in such a way too that we try to work with the person, because people have different abilities and different inclinations. So if you're not a great kicker, I'm not going to emphasize high kicks, which we don't emphasize anyway much in self-defense. Ours is very self-defense oriented, but the idea is to find some way to apply it to your life, and to look at things like economy of motion. That's not only important in martial arts, it's important in writing, it's important in your day-to-day life. And being able to give and take is a lot of what martial arts is about. Even if you're sparring and combat, was when you're training with friends, so to speak, you're not there to put their eye out, but you're there to learn how to do it. But you're actually trading. Sometimes it's you that's feeling the pain, not necessarily the injury, but the pain. And sometimes it's the other way around. And in life, that's kind of what learning about give and take. And I'm not saying that studying martial arts makes everybody good, because it damn sure doesn't. It might be tennis for some people. It might be baseball. It could be all kinds of things. It could be baseball card collecting, but it's a dedication to something and trying to understand what it means beyond just the physical expression.
Wow. That's so cool. And I guess more importantly, does your family refer to you as the grandmaster at home? Is that a title that carries over?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. No.
There's another
My
grandmaster.
students actually refer to me. My students actually refer to me as professor.
I love that.
That's more of a Japanese translation term, but Shen Chuan, though it's a mixed art. We use, like I said, the Chinese name because I think it sounds cool. It means spirit fist, and it also, which is something of our techniques are, kind of oriented in such a way that they're harder to see, and so on and so on. But it's also, like I said, it's a kind of a tribute to the greatest martial arts laboratory.
That's awesome. All right. Well, geez, we could go martial arts all day, but it's not many writers you get to talk about that with. I know you get asked this a lot, obviously, but I'm just curious. Let's go back to the beginning. Like, did you know you were going to be a writer? Did you always have these stories in you, or was there a moment where things changed and then you became a writer?
I think, well, always know when I came out of the womb, I probably wasn't too alert to anything. But by the time I was about 4 years old, yeah, maybe, who knows? But by the time I was 4 years old, I was trying to write and draw comic books. And I wasn't thinking of, oh, this is my career, because I didn't know what a career really was, what that meant. But it meant that I was driven to tell stories. I also grew up with storytellers. My father couldn't read or write. but he was a great storyteller, and that had been passed on. He was born in 1909. My mother in 1914, I think that's right. And they had a different experience than I'd had. My father wasn't far off the Old West. I always think it's weird to realize that when my father was born in 1909, Mark Twain was alive. He died the next year. And it's even more important to realize that Wyatt Earp was alive, and he died, I think, 1914. I could be off a little bit. Bat Masterson, Buffalo Bill, 1917, I believe. So these people were all alive when my father was, when he was born and when he was a child. And I think that's remarkable. And he had relatives who had fought in the Civil War, and he had relatives who had done all of those Western things that, we grew up on that were made into the mythology of the West. And then he became a adult during the Great Depression. That's when he and my mother got married. And he worked all kinds of jobs, including, like I said, boxing and wrestling for money by catching boxcars and trains and being dropped off in towns where they had fairs, and they paid you to box and wrestle. And what happened is that was the invention of professional wrestling. They were doing it just to see who won originally, and then they go, then we could really make a game out of this, a sport out of this.
Put some costumes on them and some steroids, and man,
that's right. But my dad, by the time they were doing that, he was already doing other things, and my mother gave him an old car. And I never can remember if it's a Model T or a Model A. I get those mixed up, but she gave him one and said, take this apart, put it back together until you can do it blindfolded, because he always wanted to be a mechanic, and he did, and he became a mechanic, and that's what he did till he retired.
Wow. That's great. So your dad got to see the real Tombstone Kurt Russell was awesome, but I imagine, well,
they released alive. I don't know. He didn't get to see them, but wow. My dad knew Bonnie and Clyde. He'd met Bonnie and Clyde a couple of times, and
wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, I remember we had a gift from one of Bonnie's relatives for my baby gift. I don't remember, who it was, because I didn't, I was a kid, and then later on, I didn't think to ask. It didn't mean anything to me. I didn't know anything about it.
Oh, and man, we robbed banks.
I grew up in an interesting time. What's really cool to think about is that I heard rock and roll for the very first time. Rockabilly for the very first time, that became rock and roll. And, of course, the blues was out there, but I remember that because I was just the right age, 4 or 5, when rock and roll, rockabilly, became the thing with Elvis and Johnny and Cash and so on and so on. And my brother was 17 years older, and he tried to record at Sun Records. He didn't have any real luck, but he met Elvis because he married a girl in Memphis who graduated high school with Elvis. So she introduced him to Elvis, and they just knew each other in passing. But I just think that's kind of a weird, cool connection. And my daughter, producer on some of her music, was John Carter Cash, Johnny's son. Yeah. So it's weird. It's almost like a circle, because there I was listening on the radio, that early stuff, and they were playing live right down the road from me, but I didn't know that, on the radio in Gladewater, Texas, with Tom Perryman, who was the DJ. And he gave a lot of those people their first start. Elvis in Gladewater, Texas, he came there all the time. You'd hear about the Louisiana Hayride, and you hear about Sun Records, but the next important place was Gladewater. And Johnny Cash wrote I Walk the Line in Gladewater. And
oh, no way.
Elvis pressed, according to Johnny. And then Elvis, he stayed in people's homes there. There's a museum there, which I'm included in, and then Elvis is really included in. And it has photographs of him, in people's homes or at different things of that nature. And he stayed at the little motel there, and they still have the card where he signed in. And it's now an apartment complex. Oh. And it was a motel, and it had a sign out front that said air conditioned inside. And that really meant something back then, because it was definitely air conditioned outside if the wind was blowing. But inside, you needed some kind of
indoor plumbing.
Air conditioning.
Yeah, and indoor plumbing too.
And that old radio station is now a recording studio. In fact, my daughter recorded 2 of her songs there, just because she wanted to stand where Elvis had stood and sing.
Oh, that's so cool. I'd love to be able to go like, hello, I'm Johnny Cash. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. That's the Ring of Fire.
They have Right. They have a Jerry Lee Lewis signature there. He had written on the soundboard.
Ooh, the
They had
killer.
it authenticated, and they have it on the wall where he. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool, man. Well, what a fun cocktail to sort of percolate while you're this writer is
Right.
this aspiring writer. That makes
Well,
it makes
right.
sense. That's so cool.
Yeah, it makes sense, and there was all kinds of things that came together just right for me. My father being a great storyteller, even though he was not educated. My mother was a great reader. She read everything, and she passed that interest on to me. Comic books, and then television was in its infancy. It was new, relatively. It was 48, I guess, is when it came in. I was born in 51. So by the middle 50s, I think we got our first television about then. And I was watching those old Tarzan movies with Johnny Weissmuller and others too. But I watched the old Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers serials, and old Universal horror films and old science fiction films, and all of that stuff came together in a kind of rumble tumble, so to speak, with me discovering short fiction and longer fiction in books that my mother handed to.
Wow. So, oh gosh, so many. I don't know where to start here. The the beginnings of your writing. So you loved comic books, etc., and you had this really eclectic influences. These really eclectic influences around you.
Right.
Was there a moment when you said, "Okay, this is actually something I'm gonna make this like I love doing this, and this is gonna be my life's work"?
Yeah, what happened is that, of course, I was just drawn to telling stories, and like I told you, I didn't know what a career was. All I wanted to do, oh, this is great. I want to write comic books and draw. The only problem was I had no artistic talent. I
Hmm.
always say as a joke that when I was 4, I was a genius artist. By the time I was 6, I was the same, and by the time I was 12, I had probably gone back a little bit. So I never really
Yeah.
was any good at that side of it, but I was good at writing, and stories got easier for me. When I was 11, I think I was about 11, I think that's right, I read Edgar Rice Burroughs. And when I read him, I had to be a writer. There was just something perfect for my age. And that book, it's, those things have dated a lot now, but he's still my sentimental favorite writer. And my mother was a painter too. And I got a lot from that. She painted, and I loved the imagery and movies. And it was the perfect storm.
So I'd love
And
to
I was
ask.
11 when I said I had to do it. You asked me
Okay.
when I felt that was it. That's when I decided for sure.
So I'm gonna assume that everyone can improve their writing, but do you think to make it as a professional writer, work is enough, or do you have to have some gift of internal gab or some inner monologue that helps you write this stuff? Is this something that anyone can do, or is it sort of this different for everybody?
Well, some of the books I read, I get the impression that anybody can do them. but
I see you've read my work.
yeah, there's a uniqueness that's different, and I guess that's talent. You can learn to structure a story and put it together, and you can learn to write sentences that are readable, perhaps grammatically correct, and everything just right. But honestly, for me, the writers that have impacted me, I think, have something already. They have some sort of need to communicate. They have some sort of need for those stories to be read, for those stories to be seen, if we're talking about film or even painting or what have you. And I always felt that I had like an inner demon. My friend Ardith Mahar used to say it was like a devil was behind me with a whip. And there's a certain truth to that, because I was driven, and because I just couldn't stop having all these stories, and then yet I had this real life where I was, I did martial arts, but I worked in as I got older, I worked for the garbage and street department in Gladewater during the summers, because that's all you could do as a young man. 16, they give you so many hours a day. And then I went to the aluminum chair factory, and then I did the mobile home factory briefly, because they fired me because I was so bad at it. I did bouncing. I was a martial artist, and I'd get an occasional job, bouncing when I got a little older. And I helped manage a band a little bit, but I worked in the rose fields with my wife. My wife and I worked in the rose fields. We hauled hay. We had a self-subsistent farm, a goat dairy. We did all of those things, which I feel add as more to it in some ways, because you want your writing to be learned and you want to be a reader. I read a lot. I mean, I am a tremendous reader. I normally read 3 or 4 books a week. Lately, it's been more like one. I've got other reasons that I'm not reading quite as much, but also having a real life where you deal with people in a realistic way, not just, looking at pictures on your phone, and not, and where you have to get out and struggle, and when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, you could be in a fight for nothing, because there was just the culture of itself in East Texas was something, which is one reason I was drawn to martial arts, because it happened a lot. And when I had real long hair, I was a civil rights guy. I was a Vietnam War resistor. So,
you had some people challenge you.
I did, and I had a different row to hoe, and so I think all those things, though, are what made me the kind of writer I am. So that's outside of talent. Talent is some other inner thing that connects to that connects with the observation that you get from reading books, watching movies, comics, what have you, because anything can influence you, but you need both. But you don't want just everything to feel like the stink of the library, nor do you want everything to just be like it's just raw stupid.
Oh, so I mean, because then you look at, and again, it's not fair to, because you have people like James Patterson, who just seems to be like a machine, and then you look at like our mutual or your friends, Dean. I have not yet actually got to meet him, but you look at Dean Koontz and Stephen King. The Green Mile was on the other day, and halfway through the movie, I went, "Oh yeah, this is also Stephen King," and I'm going like, how does this person crank out so much? So many stories, and I go, is that just a once in a lifetime talent, or do I need to have a really angst filled life and some open struggles with that? You talk about struggle, I mean, he's pretty open about his battles, and there's that trope of the tortured writer, in is that maybe true?
I don't have that. I had those times, but I don't feel tortured at all. I never have, and I don't have a lot of writers seem to have depression, but I think that's just because the percentage of a lot of people have depression. But that's, fortunately, it's not that I don't have moments when I feel down or depressed because of a thing that's obvious, but I fortunately don't have what a lot, and that's one reason I don't like to say I get depression, because there are people who have a serious problem with that's chemical and it's beyond their choice, and it's not even about something that's happened to them just now. That's serious, and so I don't like to put myself in that, because I got the blues today, So to me, life is such an excitement. The writer that always I connected with in that way was Ray Bradbury.
Oh, I
because
love Ray Bradbury.
I get up in the morning and I say, God damn, this is the greatest job in the world. And there may be bad things going on here and there. There may be tragedies in my life. There have been. But on the whole, I don't feel tortured at all. And I feel that's why I write so much, because I'm having fun. Now, do I connect with darker things? Right. Have I seen some darker things? Right. I grew up in the South during segregation, and so I write about that. It influences my work. It is part of a scar. In fact, it's not from feeling guilt. It's from feeling humanity. And I think that those are things I want to put in my work. I like to write things that are just sometimes entertaining. Then I like to write things that are still entertaining, but have some real social connection to them, like The Bottoms, for example, one of my novels. The Hal and Leonard are kind of in between. They're more entertaining. But to me, if I just wrote, and I have nothing against James Patterson, I mean, more power to him. He helps us make money for the rest of us to make money.
Oh yeah, but he's awesome.
Right, but I don't think he's a great writer.
Right, and actually, I don't think he would say that either. He probably wouldn't put himself in the yeah.
No, he wouldn't. No, he is a producer, and he's producing a product, and he's very good at it. And then I've known people that criticize folks that are doing that, and I always say, he's got something I don't have. I said, what's that? I said, wide appeal.
Oh yeah, Patterson's well, and I'm curious too. So like with someone like, let's take Stephen King, and you guys in similar genres at times, like does someone when it comes to ideas like that, because it's like you can't control the number of concepts you get. I'm sure there are activities you can do to breed inspiration, but when you look at someone, is Stephen just a freak of nature who had so many great, and then the discipline to write every day and crank them out, or do you think that was he's just a special case and a talent like
I
that?
don't think he's any different than a lot of other writers. He's been
Okay.
highly successful, and
Right.
he's an excellent writer.
Right.
He's really good. But no, there are a lot of writers that have had tremendous success that are nowhere near as good as Stephen King, who's had tremendous success.
Right.
And there are a lot of writers that may be as good and possibly better that have had no success or no real success.
Yeah.
But I feel connected to Stephen in this way. I only know Stephen kind of in passing, and his son's a little bit better because we've communicated a little. But what I think is that Stephen is like me in this respect, is that we both came from poor circumstances. We both wanted something other than what was there. And we wanted some opportunities beyond that. And I think my mother and father both put that, especially my mother, put that ambition in me. And I had a great family. They were just always supportive. Stephen didn't have a father at home, but he had a mother who did just like my mother did and encouraged him to do these things. So he probably, like me, was feeling, I never felt miserable or really lonely, but I felt different. In his case, I can't speak for Stephen, but I know from things he's written that, he felt somewhat isolated and different. And so I found that I was interested in things that a lot of other kids weren't interested in. And I wasn't interested in a lot of other kids when I was younger because they seemed to be interested in stuff that seemed kind of childish to me.
Yeah.
No, because I was reading at 4 years old, and so it was different. And I think in that respect, Stephen and I both have this in common, and I can speak for him in this respect because I don't have to ask him, is that we're full of stories. We've put so many things in our head that they've combined and bred with one another, and they have to come out. And so I think that's why stories come to me without effort. I don't plot. I don't plan. I get up in the morning and I start writing. Next morning I get up and continue onward until it's finished. Sometimes, and I work 3 hours a day. That's my deal. I think Dean takes all day to build up. I don't want to live like that.
Well, he's building his house.
That's good for him.
Dean's busy building his house.
Yeah.
That's the
Well, they is now. Yeah, he's always building a house.
I know, right?
Right. But the difference is he used to work 12, 14 hours a day and eat at his desk. I thought, I love writing, but I don't love it that much. I want to get out and have a life. I got a wife, I got a family, I got friends, I got martial arts, I've got interests. I travel all over the world. So to me, I get up, I do my stuff, 3 hours, 3 to 5 pages. If I get more than that, terrific. I do one draft and revise it as I go. And then I do one revision when it's finished, a polish, I call it. I'm out of there, and I'm on to the next thing.
All right. So I got to ask you, so you the writing process, this is great. And I love, and it's funny because people always, our listeners always say, ask the writers this, right? And I'm always laughing because y'all know it's going to be the same answer from all these professional writers at one point, which is write. James Patterson actually said, he's like, how you'll know if you're a writer? I love this in his class. He said, you'll know how there's a great way to find out if you're a writer. You'll write. Because if you don't, you're not a writer. And he's like,
you're not a writer. That's it.
He had an advertising job. He's like, before I repented of my Madison Avenue, advertising, he's like, I got up at 4 a.m. so I could write before because I don't want to give all my best ideas to someone else. So you write, I'm curious. So for the bulk of your career, if you had to generalize it, would you say you're up in the morning and is writing first things first? That's what you do, like coffee and writing?
Yeah. Well, the earlier career, I did just like James did. I got up early to write before the jobs I had to do. And when we had a goat dairy and all that, I wrote when I could, but I wrote regularly. Now, once I reached a certain level of learning, because I tried writing all day when I've got that freedom to do it like a weekend or something like that. And I just realized I wasn't any good at that. But at some point, and it's been since the 90s, early 90s, I started writing fewer hours. And I told myself, instead of trying to go, how many chapters can I do today? I'm not a machine, but I'm kind of a machine in that I show up and I do my 3 to 5 pages a day. and I don't wait for the muse because there isn't any muse to wait for. I'm it. And when I show up, the muse has shown up. Now it's time to kick the muse in the ass and wait, make them get to work. I don't believe in that waiting for inspiration shit. You know, you're your own inspiration. And what you'll find on those days you feel really inspired and you put it down, and on those days you don't feel inspired and you force yourself to work, it reads the same. You either get better or you don't. And you get better when you first start, you get better in like 4 to 6 months increments. Later on, it's a little slower. But my deal is I get up 7 days a week. Once in a while, I'll take a day off or decide I'll take a week off between a project. But even most time when I finish the project, I get up the next morning and go right to work, even if it's on a short story or a poem or whatever, because I like doing it. I'm not someone who likes having written, although I like that as well, but I like writing. And I don't think of it as like, oh, I'm just so, so powerfully pained and intellectual that this is so tough. I've worked real jobs. So all you guys that feel that way, fuck you. Go out and work at the aluminum chair plant or work in the rose fields. I was a janitor, was the easiest job I had before I became a writer. So I don't believe in the major writers, the big ones. I don't believe that of anybody, be they genre, be they whatever. It's not as hard as a lot of other things. Trust me. And, and I came from a man who couldn't read or write, so I wanted to be sure that I had an easier life than he did, which took me a while to arrive at. But I sold my first piece when I was 21 and went full time when I was 29 and have been ever since.
Wow.
And that's because I wanted it. So this whole idea about how much I suffer, I'm sure you're going to talk to some people that talk about how hard they suffer, but I ain't one of them. I love it.
That's wonderful. Oh, I love that's so refreshing. It's interesting is I love hearing too that you write, because I have always believed that. As I've had, in college, I would, you always find that there's peak moments of productivity, and I always thought whenever I said I have the whole day to do anything, it never gets done. It was always like when I said, you know what, and I had a mentor say, look, you know what, commit to 30 minutes a day. Just say, look, because if it's an hour, you'll be like, no, I can't have an hour. He's like, everyone has 30 minutes. Turn off the damn TV. You have 30 minutes. And he's like, even if you just did 30 minutes a day, you will have something like in 6 months. And also you can 30 minutes isn't that tough. And so I love hearing that, because I've tried that and I just so I don't, maybe some people can, but my quality starts to go down. After a certain amount of time, you're like, this is diminishing returns.
Well, right. As I remember, if I remember what Dean said once, he said that he has to build. But for me, I start at my best and go downhill. I get diminishing returns because for me, when I feel the imagery is starting to fade and I've got my 3 to 5 pages, if I keep going, it's only because that imagery is not fading and that voice is real. And the sound of the prose, the way the prose is written is somehow almost enlightening, and when it gets to where it's not, if I've worked, I do it. Now, if I have a day and I hadn't worked yet, even if it's tough and it's going bad, I just keep going. I keep hammering. And then I revise it as I go. And I'm often find that it's still as good as it's going to be, generally speaking. That means that I may have to change a little bit here and there. But sometimes when I think I'm doing my best, I look at it and it's no better. It's not even as good sometimes. So you have to constantly revise daily, because just because you feel the glory doesn't mean that's glory on the page. And just because you feel like shit doesn't mean it's shit on the page.
So it's funny because I'd say most of the writers I talk to, more often than not, they come back to a page. Sometimes it's like, hey, that was really good. But more often than not, that thing that was Shakespearean poetry to you yesterday, you look at the thing, you're like, what the hell was that? What did I can't believe I wrote that, And
I tend to revise as I go. And then the next morning I'll read over what I did the day before. And sure. And then in that final polish, that's when I realize that moment of genius that I had is not really that good. And so I'll get rid of that, and the thing is this, there's no such thing as perfection. You're not going to get everything right. I don't give a damn if somebody tells you that, there's no such thing as perfection. There's as good as you can do at your moment in time.
Yeah.
because your moments in time change because you learn new things, you get better. What I wrote back in the 70s is all shit. And then in the 80s, I got to where I was writing some pretty good stuff, you know, and I got better as I went. There are certain stories too that I wrote when I was young, I couldn't write now. And there's certain stories I can write now that I couldn't have written then.
Do you mean by
And part of
ability or
it's experience.
do you mean by ability or just the fact that your lens has changed from the world, from
I think the
experience?
lens has changed and inclination to some extent. And some of the stories I wrote early in my career are some of my best, but I've written some great ones since, I think, and some better novels, I think. But the difference is that there were youthful inclinations that I don't have now.
Yeah.
Things that maybe moved me a lot then don't move
Right.
me as much now.
Right.
It's
So you
not that
couldn't
it's not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You're a
I get
different
that.
person.
Yeah, because you can't speak. You can't write authentically some of the things that you were feeling back then that you are.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a matter of it being better because you were young or worse
Right.
because you were young or worse or better because you're older or middle period, whatever you want to look at it, is that it's just that you have different inclinations and different enthusiasm, and youth gives you a different eye. And I do think there are some things that I did that I look at and I go, damn, I wish I could do that now. But then I look at things I'm doing now and I said, I couldn't have done that then.
Absolutely. So for those listening who say, because I know there tends to be this obsession with achieving greatness early in one's life, and you do find, I think it was Gladwell in some of his books that it tends to be a lot of people did their sort of magnum opus in their 30s or whatever. But would you say when it comes to writing specifically that people should not be concerned, say, that your best, it's not true that your best days are behind you necessarily, that you can, there's no time like the present to write, and that some people, their amazing story comes in their 20s and others it comes in their 60s. There's no reason to think that you're gonna lose. It's not like athletes where you're gonna lose, that's gonna degrade.
No.
Do you find your writing actually improves, gets character as you get older?
I think so. I do think that as you get older, your energy wanes.
Yeah.
Mine hasn't yet. Mine's still
I can tell.
pretty intense. Yeah. But I know other writers and friends of mine who are 80 and above, and they say that they have ideas and they can still put the prose down clearly, but they don't have the will that they once had. And I think that's true of everything.
Yeah.
You reach a point. It's one reason I write so much, because when I get to that point, I want to say, okay, and I've been one of those people that if I died tomorrow, I had just the life I wanted.
That's awesome.
I didn't miss it. I did not miss my window. And part of that's luck and a lot of it's design. And I just think that coming from my background, I'm a lot happier than people who are always looking for fame and money. I have some fame, I'm not the most famous person in the world, but I'll be surprised. I'll be somewhere and somebody will recognize me, and I'll go, what the hell, and when I'm in Italy, people will recognize me on the street because I'm very popular there. But I only like that up to a point, because one of the reasons I like being a writer is there's a certain, I guess you're not as well known as, say, an actor. There's not somebody always looking at you going, oh, that's so-and-so. It'll happen sometimes, but it's not all the time. And the other thing is that how much money do you need? I would like to have more to give to charities, to do things like that, but I'm set. I'm not the richest in the world, but I have purposely chosen to do things I wanted to do, many of which I knew wasn't going to sell much or wasn't going to be seen by many people. I did experimental stuff. I did small press stuff. I did major novel stuff, the whole thing, screenplays. I always told myself I will not get caught in that trap. And I didn't. Now, who knows? Maybe tomorrow I will.
No, man, I love that. That's awesome. Living your authentic life,
It's not
man.
why I do it. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I want enough fame to sell.
That's right.
And I want enough money to know that I'm secure, because I come from poverty.
Yeah.
Dean also said something about once poor, always poor. There's a certain truth to that. And I think, like, my kids both write, and they both sell. My son's had a couple of movies made, and he's written a lot of comics and stories. And my daughter's written a lot of short stories, and they have other careers too. But for them, they like it, and they maybe even love it, but they don't love it like I love it.
Yeah,
And they got to start with it already, they got to start with someone who had already done it. And like I said, I had no idea. I didn't know how it was done. I didn't go to college. I had a few hours of college. I went for a year at Tyler Junior College, some at University of Texas before I dropped out. Then I went to Stephen F. Austin, took a few hours. I've taught writing, which is strange. But on the other hand, I think that people like me and maybe Dean and Stephen, we're all driven.
Oh man, you are. Well, you have to be to do that. All right, so I have to ask. So when you have the beginnings of an idea, what is your actual process? So do you start with a treatment? Do you just jot down some notes? What's sort of from ideation to publication? What's sort of the Lansdale process?
I don't plot, man. I don't plot things, unless I'm forced to by some project I get into where they say, well, we got to have this. But generally when I do it, I'm no longer interested in doing it because I feel like I've already told the story. I will occasionally jot notes. A novel on Mars, the Martian, the elevator that goes from goes from Earth to Mars. And, they're really working on something like that. So something like that may stir an idea, but that's an idea. That's not a story. And the story has to come to me from some inexplicable place that I start messing with it. And I'll know pretty soon if I don't find the voice, I'm not going to write it. If I find the voice and it starts to speak to me, and the imagery starts to appear, and then the character comes on stage, and when they start to feel like they're real, that they have a life they've lived, not a moment where I'm just filling them in for Bob, the burly, what can he be, the burly captain of the ship or whatever you call it. That kind of stuff doesn't interest me at all. It's got to be somebody that I feel, at least in my subconscious, is full blown, but yet I don't know that yet. And then when the dialogue starts to sound real, that when people speak, it sounds, it may not be real speech, but it gives the illusion of real speech to such an extent that I'm satisfied,
So are you just sitting down
to
are you just sitting down? So you have the story in your head, and are you just writing chapters? You're not, because James in his master class, he says, well, he's like, I write out, here's what I want to have happen in these scenes, et cetera. And then he's like, then I sit down and fill in because the blank page can be pretty intimidating. Do you have anything like that? Or you just sit down and it just starts coming out?
If I wrote like that, I would not like it because it would be just dead prose for me. I'm not speaking for other people.
Right.
I'm saying for me, it'd just be dead prose. It'd be like fill in the blanks. It'd be like having one of those things you used to buy and it's got numbers and you paint by the numbers. I'm not interested in doing that, so for me, it has to be that moment of glory is every morning when I get up, and I plot in the subconscious, I'm sure, but I'm not writing that down. I make those notes like I told you sometimes, but I don't plot, and I don't know how to tell you, but every morning when I get up, it's filled back up. I never had writer's block in my life. Have I ever had a day when I was slower or less, certain? Yeah. And most of the time by the end, as my period of 3 hours gets to the end, I start, oh, there it is. I knock out 3 pages, 15 minutes, I'm done. But it may take me the rest of the time, all 3 hours to do 3 pages, but generally it's within 3 hours. And after that, I'm not worth shit, I start to go downhill. I have occasionally had, when I had like a looming deadline, I've occasionally worked in the afternoon or at night, maybe go in and do another 30 minutes. And sometimes I've had a short story that's bugging me, but my main project is taking up all my time. So I go in, I'll work 15 minutes and 15 minutes before bed, and I'll do that for a few days. And then pretty soon I find that it's fitting within that 3 hours with the major project. I don't know why. I can't explain that, but it seems like it knows it. That stuff you're doing later, it's not going to be as good. This is when you work. So I write my main project and then try to, I think Keen calls them his toy trucks. And that's kind of what it is for me too,
Oh, that's great. Now, so you also mentioned you love to, you read, a couple books a week even too. So you're writing for 3 hours a day. Are you reading the rest of the day or or are you just a fast reader?
I'm a very fast reader. That's my superpower is I read fast and my retention's good, and I find that as I've gotten older, it's a little less good. And I read a little slower, but most of that isn't because I read slower, but because there are other things in my life that I'm dealing with too,
Right.
and not for me even, but other things that I'm dealing with. So it slows me down a little. But what I do is I read after I get through writing. I generally read, and I may read 2 hours, and then I'll probably watch a movie or something. Then I go exercise, and then my wife and I hang out. We do our thing the rest of the day. And then it's before bedtime. I'll read like another hour or so. But it's not uncommon for me to read an average sized book in 3 to 4 hours.
Wow.
And what's changed is I used to be able to read one, put it down, pick another one up, and go right. And I'm having a harder time doing that as I've gotten older. And I don't spend time on things that don't entertain me. I don't. I read nonfiction and fiction. I love short stories more than anything.
Hmm.
And I find that as I grow older, and this is probably age that is involved, I like the older stuff better than the newer stuff, but I read the newer stuff as well because, I don't want to be one of those guys that back in the old days, because I don't really believe that that's true. But I do know one thing I learned from looking at certain writers. Some writers peak early, like you said, some get better in the middle. Very few get better towards the end, but there are
Hmm.
some that stay pretty steady. And I like to think I'm one of those writers, but it's because I want to be. I want to be.
Oh, well. All right. So I mean, this is a tough question, I'm sure, because you read so many books, but like, are there any just in no particular order, just like Joe's must reads, they're just like, oh my gosh,
You
like,
mean that I've read during my life? Is that what you're
yeah, you're
talking
just like,
about?
yeah. And I would say maybe even narrow it down for anyone who's even contemplating, like, getting into fiction writing or story or whatever, just like classics of fiction that you love, and then just great stories.
Okay, well, we're talking about classics, and a lot of people, I see these lists that people make. This is a classic of fiction. What's 4 years old? It may well be in time,
Yeah.
but people don't read very broadly anymore.
Yeah.
And it's always about what's hip now and what's the trend now.
Right.
And you got to look back at Mark Twain. He was considered a hack, or at least considered just an entertainer. And there was these other writers that were the real writers that nobody remembers.
Oh yeah.
And Twain was more than that. Twain was a genius. So
Oh
I
yeah.
would say Twain. I would say Huckleberry Finn, which is, one of those things when I was a kid in the South, I read, it made me recognize racism for what it
Yeah.
was. And To Kill a Mockingbird,
Oh
I
yeah.
think the same for me. Those two, they changed my life. And I've heard people go, well, yeah, but, they use certain language. What they had to. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Is like sometimes you have to show ugly to know ugly.
Hmm.
And sometimes you have to make your points satirically. And sometimes you make those points for somebody that doesn't necessarily know you're making them, but subconsciously they do. So those two writers jump to mind. I think Flannery O'Connor, and she's gotten a label of racism a little bit here and there, but I don't care. It's not because it's bigger than that, because she doesn't write racist stories. She writes stories about the South as they are, which includes racist.
Right.
And, I think F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, ought to be for everybody. Kipling's stories ought to be for everybody. You can learn a lot about storytelling from Kipling, Rudyard Kipling. I think that if you're branching out more, you read Ray Bradbury, you read Charles Beaumont, if you can find his stories anymore. You read Richard Matheson, you read Raymond Chandler, you read Dashiell Hammett, James Cain. You read Hemingway. Nobody wrote better, cleaner prose than Hemingway when he was on. And it's best exemplified in his short stories.
Hmm.
I think he wrote some good novels, but he never wrote the great American novel. Fitzgerald did. But Hemingway wrote some great American short stories.
Hmm.
And some of the greatest. The Killers is one of the finest stories ever written. The Hills Like White Elephants.
Hmm.
And so I like all that stuff. I look at Fred Brown, which some people consider more of a pulp writer. I don't agree. I think that you've got mastery, right there at your fingertips to study. Because a lot of times, if you can learn things too about mystery, he wrote science fiction and mystery. But if you can learn how to put a mystery together, you can learn how to put any other kind of novel together.
Hmm.
It was the greatest thing I ever learned was to understand mysteries, though I've written mostly when I've written novels that sometimes are called mysteries, they're really crime or suspense. But learning how to structure, I no longer think about structure and I violate structure. You learn the rules to break them. And so people like that teach you. Raymond Chandler, his language, my God, he's gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
And Elmore Leonard, there's somebody else that you should certainly read, George Higgins, especially the Friends of Eddie Cole. Those are, man, I could go on all day. You shouldn't ask this question.
No, I love it, man. Well, actually, I have to ask, one of my all-time favorites, since you mentioned stories, is Poe.
Poe was the first book I ever owned. My mother gave me Poe.
I just think I would remember, because at Halloween we'd read those. One, the Raven to me is still just like, I mean, that guy, I feel like he's on another plane, because that poem is like,
he is.
It's just unbelievable. But then you get into like the Cask of the Amontillado, the Mask of the Red Death, and you're going like, this guy just like, the Telltale Heart. The
Mask of the Red Death is so amazing because it's very short, but boy, is it powerful. Once you read it, you never forget it. And that's true of a lot of Poes. Like I never really liked Lovecraft much, but I've been influenced by him, because anybody in this modern age has been influenced by the concept of the Cthulhu mythos that writes genre fiction anyway, and even don't write genre fiction. And I think Stephen King was really influenced and really liked Lovecraft. I always found him kind of, I thought, well, where's the women? Maybe that was my orientation. Where's the women? But it was also, what do these guys do for a living? What the hell? These guys are just hanging out, and they got these big houses with lots of books, and they're just pulling their Johnson all day. What the hell is going on here? And so but I loved a lot of the writers who were influenced by him. And another one I'll name is Robert Bloch. You want to learn how to construct short stories in particular, Bloch's your man. And he wrote Psycho. And Psycho is it's funny, just like Hitchcock interpreted it with his screenwriter. And that screenwriter took a lot of credit for the stuff he lifted directly from.
I never realized that was based off a short story. Psycho.
It's not. It's a novel.
Oh, it's a novel. Psycho. Oh, really?
Yeah, but it's a short novel. Yeah, it's a short novel. All of his novels were short.
Interesting.
He wrote very brief things, but his best stuff really were his short stories. And you can get what screams are made of, or the best of Robert Bloch, and that's what you need. And if you want to study more about how to use your imagination in constructed stories, there's Henry Kuttner, there's Cyril Kornbluth. These writers like that teach you how it's done, and they do imagination beautifully. Roald Dahl, John Collier, all of those writers are brilliant. And that's why their stuff gets constantly reprinted and filmed, constantly remade into films, or stolen and made into similar films or similar stories.
You're right. This was a dangerous topic to open up. I'll close this out.
I could go on.
Lightning reaction, just because it was one of my favorite books I couldn't put down. Not a classic, because it hasn't been around long enough, but James Clavell. Shogun was one of those books that I just couldn't.
Oh, I love Shogun. Yeah.
I could not put it down. I was like, this is what The Last Samurai wishes it could be. It was so good.
Absolutely. And me too, man. That book, I lived in that world.
And it's like this.
And I like the mini. Yeah, and the miniseries was good at that time, especially. Maybe now it's like Lonesome Dove. I mean, there's a great.
Oh, I heard that book's amazing.
I heard it's one of the great. I believe it's one of the great American novels, without question. And the show, the series, magnificent. Really, really good stuff. And then you got people like Michael Chabon's Cavalier and Clay, which is amazing. And really, that's the book of his that appeals to me. Some of the others don't, not because they're badly done. They're just, for whatever reason, they didn't. But when I read that, because I guess I grew up loving comics, I was really caught in that, because that's what it deals with. But it has a golem in it. It has all kinds of odd things that are unexpected. It's a little bit rambly. It's a little bit disconnected, and it's brilliant.
Oh, man.
And Raymond Carver, if you want to learn how to be precise, read Raymond Carver.
I'm going to put all these in the show notes, folks. Don't worry. I'll reference all these so I can put it in. It's going to be a novel. The show notes will be a novel. All right.
You don't want to get me started, man. I'm a reader and a half.
I love it.
And that's not even counting. We didn't get into the nonfiction, like in Cold Blood, which I think's more as much fiction as nonfiction, but it's a great piece of work. And, and I love things that are about history. I read a lot of historical nonfiction and some regular historicals as well.
Oh man, we'll have to bonus episode. We'll have to compare notes on that. I have some.
Okay, and we're not going to talk about Glendon Swarthout, who wrote great things like The Shootist and The Homesman. Don't get me going, man. You done started it. You got an animal.
Okay, well
loose in the
let's
house.
transition to another vital subject, and then I want you to finish by plugging what you're up to right now. You have no shortage of opinions, which is awesome. So it was a tradition on this show. We always ask our married guests what's their wisdom, both for how to find the partner and then how to make marriage work.
Well, my wife and I have been married right at 49 years.
Congratulations.
And, yeah. And we got married when we were 21. So we may be closer to 50 years. I'd have to start looking 49. I think it's this August is 49. And, I don't know. I don't think there is a key. We just clicked, and we don't do any of those things where they say, well, we got to have a date night. We got to have this plan. We got to do this. We got to, I get yelled at when I screw up, and and I learn,
which is rare. Which is rare. You rarely screw up.
Yeah, but we get along. We always have. Even when we argue, we'll be okay. And I think also we're not afraid to argue. We know how to disagree, and we're not trying to, expect every day to wake up and be as perfect where everybody is just so happy. I don't believe I don't believe being happy is about constant utopia. I'm happy, but I'm not utopian. You have bad days. She has a bad day. I have a bad day. And then sometimes we both have a bad day. But I think we both had the same goals. We both wanted, my wife was like the first female dispatcher in Nacogdoches, Texas. They didn't have them before her for fire department. It just wasn't done because they stayed overnight. Oh, man. And she worked as a police officer for the campus. And, she was, and really created the Horror Writers Association.
Wow.
Rick McCammon came up with the idea. She created. Dean Koontz wrapped it up on the end. But, she's done a lot of those sort of things. And so I appreciate her abilities and her power. And then she managed my career from 1988 on until just recently, because I've got accountants and a bunch of other people now that, I need them. It's just too much, and we can't do all that. And she handled our daughter's early career. But I think too, some of it is luck. We got the right people. We got together and we clicked. And we were 21 and
working in the rose fields, right?
Yeah, we've been able to move with each other and things that have happened, because even though you change, Karen and I in some ways have always been the same. There's a certain thing about, we both appreciate integrity, and there's certain things like that matter. And our kids, we got great kids, and I stayed home to be a house dad. I wrote, with them home when they were taking naps. So that time I worked differently, but I still worked 20-minute stretches, things like that. So I think dedication and not worrying about it so much. I think some of this, how do I collaborate with them? How do I, find this way to compromise? You should compromise naturally. And you're not always going to be able to. There's some things I ain't going to change about me, and there's some things that she's not going to change. Accept it.
That's right. Amen. All right, we'll do this. Oh man, I have so much I'm like, keep it down. Don't bring up any more books. What's up? I gotta land the plane here. The fuel's getting low. I gotta land the plane. Right. We'll just have to have you. We'll have to have you back on and give Dean some crap if we can get him on. Take a break from house building. What are you working on right now? What are you stoked about?
Well, I'm working on a screenplay, but I can't talk about it right now.
Okay.
But I just did a previous screenplay, a short for George R.R. Martin, based on a Howard Waldrop short story called Night of the Cooters. It was directed by Vincent D'Onofrio, and he starred in it. And it's got animation as part of it, and it looks really cool. It's Trioscope, and that's coming out soon. I have no idea how George plans to put it out. I don't know if it's going to be film festivals, if he's going to try to place it somewhere. I don't know. But it was fun to do. And now I'm doing a screenplay. And then when that's finished, I've been asked to do a memoir, which I plan to do. And then I've got 2 novels with Little Brown Mulholland. And I got plenty of stuff, man. I could be here all day.
We got a new book coming out, right? Or earlier before we started.
Right now, Born for Trouble.
Uh-huh.
And it's based on my characters, Hal and Leonard.
Yeah.
And if you can find that whole series, there's 12 books in the series. Half of them are, well, maybe half, about 8 of them, I think, are with vintage Black Lizard, and the rest are with Mulholland out of Little Brown. And you can get those. Plus, there are short story collections from Tachyon, of which Born for Trouble is the most recent. And there's a television show on Netflix if you get interested. 3 seasons.
And what's that show called? That's called
Hal and Leonard.
Oh, they actually. Sorry, I didn't realize they'd actually brought it fully to Netflix. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was on Sundance originally. Yeah, well, it was on Sundance originally, and they moved it to Netflix when it ran its course. It was their #1 show, but they canceled it anyway. And then you can also go on Prime and catch Cold in July based on my work, or Bubba Hotep's out there somewhere. And there are other things. Love, Death, and Robots has done stuff of mine, and all kinds. There's all kinds of stuff. A lot of animated. Batman the animated series of the '90s. Did a lot of some of my stuff. 4 things. Superman the animated series. The animated movie Son of Batman. I mean, there's a lot of my stuff out there all the time anyway.
Was this the same Batman that was the same animation as Batman Mask of the Phantasm?
Yes.
That was such a brilliant brilliant film. I mean, it was such a
it's
interesting.
fantastic.
Yeah, I remember that as a kid. That Batman series was fantastic. It was
Well,
really one of the
wrote
best.
4 in that series. Yeah.
Oh, it was awesome. The Joker was I mean, it was just it was really good.
I did a Mad Hatter one called Perchance to Dream, and the ventriloquist in Read My Lips, and Jonah Hex in Showdown. And then later there was a thing called Batman and Robin Adventures, which was for a little bit younger. And I did a thing called Critters. I did a Superman that I worked on with some others, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was their Bizarro episode.
Oh, yeah.
And then I did a full-length Batman animated feature called Son of Batman. And I actually wrote a Batman novel and a Batman kid book, and
you're a Batman scholar. All right, so I have to ask last question. You're a Batman scholar. What do we think of the new Batman?
There were things I liked about it a lot. What I didn't like was Batman. I like Batman okay, but I didn't like Bruce Wayne at all, which I think that actor's good, but I think the way they chose to do it was that hair in my eyes, I'm sad. And then later on, I'm still sad. And later on, I'm sadder. And I just felt like it was a very two-dimensional at best, almost one-dimensional performance as Bruce Wayne. But he was an interesting Batman. And I liked that they challenged some of the stuff before. And I liked the villains were fantastic. Catwoman was great. And the Penguin, wonderful. And the Riddler, fantastic. And the way it looked was great. I love the directing. But I came away with mixed feelings, and a sort of felt like I kind of got cheated a little bit.
Yeah, that's actually that's one of Bruce Wayne's interesting. I think that makes him interesting as a character, right? Is he's this dual persona where he's this public playboy, carefree, nonchalant, right, and then privately tortured and aggressive, right, and dark. And so that tension. This was sort of I'm just sad, all the time. But yeah, right, visually,
I'm just sad.
Yeah, beautifully shot though.
Beautiful.
That one scene when he's in the club and the fire. Do you remember this? The firearms are going off, and that's the only thing that lights it up.
It's the only lighting you have. Yeah,
it was beautiful.
It's done by that lighting. It was brilliant, and a lot of the fight scenes were just brilliant. So I came out of it liking it and not liking it, and I think that and Commissioner Gordon was fantastic. I'm sad I can't remember that actor's name, but he was fantastic. And Alfred was a cipher. You could have just left him somewhere else. He should have been on. Alfred's not here. He's on vacation because he's boring.
It's hard to replace Michael Caine because Michael Caine is an amazing Alfred.
He's great. He's Michael Caine.
Michael Caine. Even Jeremy Irons was better in the DC universe because he's got such a great voice. Joe, I could talk to you for hours. It's this is so fun. I thank you so much for doing this. We're just gonna have you back on just to talk solely books because it's all
right.
Yeah, I got a shelf of ones I gotta ask you about, but I'm not gonna do it now lest we run over. But how can fans connect with you?
Well, I'm not on. There's a Facebook page that has me there, but that's not me. I have to have that to have the fan page. I don't take friend requests. I don't do that because I don't go on other people's pages. But if you want to connect with what I'm doing, you go to my fan page. I have a Twitter account, which you can find me there. And I have www.joerlansdale.com, which is my website. And you can pretty much find me all over the place. It's not hard.
All right. Well, we will, especially in Italy. So anyways,
yeah,
we've been camping with Joe Lansdale, not Joe Lonsdale, but Joe Lansdale. So, and Joe,
right, not this other guy.
That's right, this other guy. But thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate your wisdom, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, folks. If you want to help us out, and we're confident you do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button here on our YouTube channel. And if you ever feel like just listening to these, you can check us out on all major podcast streaming platforms by just searching for I Went Camping With. And there, you should also subscribe. Thanks again, folks.